Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, I'm delighted to have back on the show our esteemed faculty member, Gloria Scigliano. So thank you so much for joining us today, and how are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. It's great to see you again. So in today's episode, we're talking about Uranus Conjunct Algol in Taurus, and you've got the presentation name here, Losing One's Head. And today we're not only going to be talking about, we were trying to do this episode a few months ago, but we've only had time to do it now. So we'll be looking back at the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. But not only that, we'll also be talking about the chart of Joe Biden and the upcoming election. And also, which I love that you've put together, Gloria, it will also be looking at Uranus Conjunct Algol in a historical context as well that you've put together. And I said before the recording, please forgive me, I'm a bit under the weather today, so I'm not going to be as vocal, but you've put together a fantastic presentation, so I'll let you dive in.
This is what the aspect was looking like, the configuration, as it was completing its cycle of direct, retrograde, and then direct. The most intense part of this one was the very first conjunction. On the left here, you can see Uranus coming in to make that conjunction, and then Mars is coming down also. Both of those aspects reflect anger that's actually been percolating in the country for quite a while now.
Hmm.
The second attempt on Donald Trump wasn't really actually an attempt. It was a plan, but it never actually happened. But even so, Uranus was entering its retrograde phase, and it was still within the 1 degree that we normally use for our aspects, transiting aspects. When Uranus is retrograde, I have found that it's not nearly so erratic. And so in this situation, it fits that there were no shots actually fired. It was just a plot.
And that was the one down in Florida, correct? When there was a guy
Yes,
around the golf course.
right. The next conjunction is in October, on October 14th. Nothing specifically happened that I remember, but it does move on, still within range, and also with Mars in the picture there on the date of the election, which I thought was pretty interesting. And during this time, Pluto is also retrograding back into Capricorn for its final time, and it's at 29 degrees as well. Moving on, you have Mars is conjunct Algol at the time of the inauguration, but Uranus is kind of too far away. So maybe that will go all right. And Mars is retrograde, so again, not as much intensity there. And these last few, Mars is actually sextile, so it's more of an action type of energy than anger, at least in my mind. Then this section here and next year in April, it makes its Uranus makes its last conjunction right around tax time. So maybe there will be some upsetting things happening with taxes. I don't know, but all in all, it's just showing the easing of the tension, and the final Mars aspect is at the end, in the middle of the year. So again, Uranus is not close, so there's not so much tension going on at that time. So anyway, as we all know, we need to look at the history of past similar aspects to kind of get a better picture of how this all feels. So naturally, I went to the last time this happened. Well, that was towards the beginning of World War II, and which actually started earlier. in September of 1939. So that at that point, it would have been about a couple of degrees away from Algol. So during this opening period here, the hostilities tension was building. The beginning of World War II happened when Germany invaded Poland. And then in response to that, Great Britain and France declared war. Along the way, we have Auschwitz opening. It was originally supposedly a prison for political prisoners, but it eventually evolved into the biggest concentration camp in the whole war, where millions of people were killed. The Battle of Britain is the first part that really starts getting them together. Uranus is conjunct Algol at that time, or very close. The Battle of Britain was really the opening time when it was an air battle between the planes of the two countries. During that time, which went on from July to September of that year, during that time, General de Gaulle was sentenced to death by the Germans, and but unfortunately, he had escaped to London, and he continued to support the French resistance as a government in exile. Then, when we're right in the turn of the retrograde, it's still within 1 degree. Mars is coming into square Algol, and that's when the bombing of London began. And this was 59 days of bombing day and night without any stop, which is a pretty horrible time.
An incredible amount of destruction at that time.
Oh, man, unbelievable. Then Uranus kind of backed off for a while, but then when it came back again to the conjunction, that's the point where Germany invaded Greece. And again, Mars is squaring at that time. Then there's another lull, and Pearl Harbor was attacked. So that brought the US into the war. And at that point, Uranus is pretty far away from Algol. So I'm really kind of thinking that maybe this 1 degree approaching and separating, maybe we need to look at expanding that, at least for certain things like this.
That's a great point, because what you are illustrating here, these were very important moments in the Second World War. And again, maybe a few degrees out, whether applying or separating, but highly significant. And there seems to be a correlation here as well.
Yeah, I really thought so when I looked at this. Towards the end of this period here in 1942, by then Mars was conjunct Algol, which is similar to what was happening here. So that was World War II. And the interesting thing to me is that when I looked at all of these, what led up to them was a great deal of distress, financial hazards, unhappiness. The lead up to World War II was the Great Depression. And that went on for several years, covering the time when the actual World War II began, and almost when it was maybe in the middle of the end of the war. During that time, of course, you had the rise of Hitler, and he had his anti-Semitic views and his method of just stomping on people he didn't like and throwing them into camps and killing them. And of course, all of that became the whole World War II, which didn't end until 1945. During that time, there's the Mars square. After the conjunction to Algol, Uranus then followed on with a square to Regulus, which is the King star. And those two, these stars move so very slowly that, their aspects are forever almost. So that's the pattern in all of these things. Conjunct Algol, square Regulus.
It's remarkable research that you've done here. And what I find interesting as you pulled all this together, we're in fixed Earth sign here. Venus ruled, we've got issues with taxation, so we're bringing in monetary, we're bringing in money, and also the Earth, the Great Depression. If we go from 1930 to 1936, we had the Dust Bowl in the United States. You're literally talking about the Earth there, and matters of territory, even when we're talking about the Second World War. So it's quite interesting as you tie in the fixed Earth element, and this is remarkable research you've done here.
It took me a while. Got so interested in this whole idea that I had to go back to the time before that, which turned out to be during the Civil War. The Civil War was preceded by issues of slavery, pretty much. It resulted in, it really kind of started coming to a head at the Missouri Compromise in 1820, which is 30 years before the conjunction happened, but it kind of began then because that was a part of a legislation that was made when Missouri wanted to become a state, and it wanted to become a state as a slave state. But there was this compromise made that Missouri would only be allowed to enter the Union if Maine was also admitted as a free state. So they had this compromise, and that compromise also outlawed slavery above the 36th parallel. That whole compromise was repealed in 1854. It was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and that happened as a result of the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a Black man. He was born into slavery in Virginia, which was a slave state. At some point, his owner moved with him to Illinois, which was a free state. So after some time living there, Dred Scott wanted to buy his freedom, but his owner would not allow that to happen. So he filed suit, and the suit was based on the idea that since he had been living in a free state, that he should be able to buy his freedom. While Uranus was conjunct Algol, the Supreme Court ruled that slaves were property. They were not citizens, and they therefore had no rights. It also declared that Congress had no authority to ban slavery in any of its territories, and that the whole Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So as a result, hostilities grew and grew between the North and the South. The North saw slavery as a moral issue, and the South saw it as an economic issue, because their whole system was so embedded in having slaves, because they needed them to do the growing and the harvesting of cotton and sugarcane, which were the biggest moneymaker products that the South had. And losing the slaves would mean tremendous financial loss to the slave owners. The North, on the other hand, was just appalled by the treatment of the slaves, and especially the idea of tearing the families apart and selling husbands and wives and children separately. So in December of 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. The first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in April of 1861. Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter, which was a federal army post that had been built on an island in the entrance to Charleston Harbor. Uranus was in Taurus from 1851 to 1858. So it wasn't there the whole time of the whole Civil War, just like World War II. It wasn't there the whole time. And again, at that point, we had Mars opposite. And after conjuncting Algol, again, it moved on into squaring Regulus. So again, an opposition to the king, which in our system would be the president. Going back farther, man, that was the Civil War one. So I thought, I got so interested in this that I thought, well, I have to see what happened before that. And of course, it was the Revolutionary War. So all of these three past times were all wars, big wars. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. In that war, in the Revolutionary War, the buildup was the British taxation and on the colonies. And they're just kept raising more and more taxes. They had the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, the Stamp Act, but the one that really hit it off was the Tea Act, 1773. So this was an act that was an attempt by the British Parliament to save the East India Company. That company was failing financially, and they wanted to prevent the colonists from buying tea from smugglers at a cheaper price. There were revolts in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and of course that led to the Boston Tea Party. In the dark of night, a group of colonists boarded 3 British ships that were loaded with millions of dollars of tea and threw it all over into the harbor. So that was kind of kicked off the whole thing. The first shots were fired in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts on April 19th, 1775. And as the news of that spread, thousands of colonists rose up and they wanted to join the fight, and the war was on. They became known as the Minutemen, and that, of course, was the beginning of the Continental Army. Uranus was in Taurus from May of 1767 to, I have a little typo there. It was conjunct Algol to in June of 1772 and in May of 1773. So during this whole buildup time, and that's the one where Mars was conjunct Algol, which to me was really a perfect description of fighting against the king. So that was my exploration into prior times. And of course, now what we're dealing with now is, again, Mars conjunct Algol, except for next year, the second half of next year, it will be moving into Gemini. It's conjunct Algol till May of next year. And then, of course, it goes into Virgo. Oh, another typo, oh my. Except for that time when it's in Gemini. So we're dealing with some very strong dissension, economic pressures, the rise of racism, anti-immigration, anti-feminism. So the big question is, will there be a war in the future, near future? And of course, I can't really answer that, but it could. If I look at all the other 3, it could be a possibility. The one thing that is good to say that they're probably not is that were not, the other three were, the conjunction was kind of before the actual war started. And so maybe not, maybe we're okay. One of the other interesting things I was looking at when I was thinking about these is that I was interested to see if there were assassination attempts of high profile people during these times. And I really didn't find any specific assassinations. Lincoln was assassinated after the war, so that wasn't really during the same time. And in the case of Hitler, there were lots of plots, but most of them were discovered before they ever really happened. So I don't think that applies. So that brings us to Donald Trump's chart. And this chart has been looked at by lots and lots of people. But well, this is not Donald Trump's chart, but it's to the assassination attempt. When I looked at the chart for the attempt itself, there were a few different fixed stars that were having some kind of an aspect, but I chose these four because if you look at Algol, which, by the way, solar fire just somehow just numbers these. They're defined as extra points. So I think that the number that they get may be related to the order that you put them into the list to be selected. I'm not sure about that, but that's how you find them in the chart. So here we have transiting Algol, transiting Uranus, transiting Mars. And you can see they're very, very tightly conjunct. They are sextile and trine the nodes, which could be an indication of, that the attempt really didn't happen. It happened, but it was not successful. The story about Algol, I have to elaborate a little about that. Algol is associated with Medusa, which is one of the three Gorgons who were hideous monsters. They had big red eyes and writhing poisonous snakes from their hair, and they would turn anyone who looked at them into stone. In the end, Medusa herself was killed by Perseus, who succeeded in cutting her head off by looking at her reflection in his shield. He didn't actually look at her. So that's kind of how this death by decapitation got associated with Algol. And it's considered one of the unluckiest stars in the sky. And it's known as the devil star or the demon star. So having all three of those things together is pretty ominous. Medusa was also a symbol of protection in a weird sort of way. This happened as a result of Perseus giving the head of Medusa to Athena. The Medusa then became the center of Athena's breastplate, and the purpose was to fend off her enemies by looking at them and turning them to stone. So there was quite a story, and there's more to that. I'll tell you some more later.
I've got a question for you, because a lot of people panic if they've got, say, a personal planet or an angle close to Algol. What's been your experience through either client work or dealing with so many charts over the years?
Well, as I said, I haven't looked at the fixed stars a lot. But when we look at Donald Trump's chart, we can maybe answer that question, which is the next slide. But before we get there, I just want to go through the rest of these stars. One of the things about all of these stars, they move at about 1 minute a year, and some of them sometimes even less than that. So if it's 1 minute a year, that means it needs 60 years to move 1 degree, which is a pretty long time. Then, if you think about how long it takes to move through one sign, it's 60 years times 30 degrees is 1,800 years. So for most purposes, you can think of them as being not moving. But the interesting thing that has happened recently is that Regulus has moved into Virgo. That happened in 2011. So from everybody born before that time, Regulus was in Leo, which is this dynamic, dramatic sign, confident. And everybody born for the last 1,800 years before that is used to that type of the energy coming from the heads of state. Now we're moving into an era of a more subdued, analytical, practical head of state. So this is a big, big change that's going to last for a long time. On this particular day, we have Pluto sextile Neptune. So if you think about Regulus as being something like Zeus, the three of them were brothers. And after the War of the Titans, they divided up who's going to control the world in these ways. So Pluto, we have the Lord of the underground, Neptune, the Lord of the sea, and Zeus, king of the gods. So here we have the Lord of the underground and the Lord of the sea, which is also sort of an underground thing, working together to cause nothing but headache to this Regulus, this Zeus. Those two quincunxes are difficult interactions. And this yod, the king is at the head of the yod. So he's trying to balance between these other two. This yod is going to go on in so many charts that I have here today. It's like, this is a big thing. Next, we have Arcturus, which is conjunct the moon on that day. It's why, if you look at it as a natal type of thing, it's wider than 1 degree is okay. And the moon being as fast moving as it is, that moon is going to hit Arcturus within hours. And we have there a quincunx to this whole Algol, Uranus, Mars configuration. So Arcturus is, the story of Arcturus is really interesting too, because Arcturus is a protective energy. And what happened there is that Zeus, of course, in his philandering ways, had cast his eye upon Callisto. Callisto was a nymph who was certainly not going to make Zeus's wife happy by being involved with Zeus. So as punishment, Hera turned Callisto into a bear. And her son was named Arcas. He was out hunting one day and he nearly killed her. So Zeus, of course, in his generosity, Zeus decided, well, he was going to save her. And so what he did was he put her in the sky as the constellation Ursa Major, which we also know as the Big Dipper. If you look at the Big Dipper in the sky, and continue the arc of the handle out past the constellation, you will come to Arcturus, which is a very bright star. So Arcturus, representing the sun, is the son of Callisto, that is there to guard the Great Bear. And so that's how it got to be associated with protection. And then lastly, we have Aldebaran, which is conjunct Jupiter, which is probably also the reason. Oh, I told you the wrong thing earlier. It's not this configuration that is trying and sextile the nodes, it's Jupiter. So Jupiter and Aldebaran is a really fortunate set of energies. Jupiter, of course, the greater benefic, and Aldebaran is also considered to be a beneficial, protective type of energy. He's one of the brightest stars in the sky. He was known as the guardian of the East in the Persian system of royal stars. There were 4. And he was the guardian of the East. The Persians divided the sky into 4 segments or sections. And there was a star that was assigned to each of those areas to guard it and protect it. Aldebaran is known as the light bearer, and it has a reddish glow similar to Mars, and it also has a nature that is somewhat similar to Mars as well. So it can be quarrelsome, it can be aggressive, but it's primarily bold and protective and requires integrity in pursuing one's goal. Aldebaran is also linked to Zeus and Europa. And in this story, Zeus transformed himself into the magnificent white bull so that he could seduce the beautiful Princess Europa. And that's kind of how the whole idea of the bull's eye came to be. It's associated with that. And so Aldebaran is the star that is the eye of the bull. And in this chart, Jupiter has just passed Aldebaran. So it's in Gemini in the 6th house, which is, of course, the health of the nation. And in this case, would be looking at the health of Donald Trump. And the trine to the south node and the sextile to the north node would excuse me, sort of indicate protection there. So when we think about these 4 stars, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say some of that fortune you were talking about as well. Literally talking about millimeters in that moment.
Oh yeah, yeah. But the aspects to the nodes is what's helpful. So anyway, we have to keep in mind as we're looking at these stars that they move so very slowly. But they do move. So this is Donald Trump's chart, as opposed to just the shot. I wanted to look at, well, where are these stars in his chart? Well, the first thing, of course, is Algol is conjunct the midheaven, which kind of blew me away. Oh my gosh. It is, it's right there. It's the top thing in his chart.
It makes a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, me too. Well, and anyone knows who's looked at this chart, and lots of people have, and they talk about that Trump was born on a full moon, and that conjunct Uranus, and eclipse, and all of this stuff. And for some reason, I decided to look at the solar fire report for the chart, and I just had gone on this assumption it's a full moon. Well, it's not. He was born on the 29th degree of the gibbous moon. And I thought, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. The gibbous moon is associated with finalizing and refining plans for how you're going to get to the full moon, how you're going to achieve success. And it's like this whole lifetime has been one of preparing for what he's doing now, which, of course, when he was like 1 year old, it progressed into the full moon. But I just thought that was a very interesting little teeny idea.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So there is that. Another interesting thing that I hadn't paid any attention to before is Jupiter. Jupiter is retrograde. And what I have found with retrograde Jupiters is that instead of being open-minded and expansive, it is closed-minded and thinking that you know all the answers, which sounds sort of familiar. The interesting thing about it, though, is that Jupiter is stationary, and it's stationary retrograde, and it was only 3 hours away from turning direct in his chart. So again, it's like there is this preparation for the change and how he's going to use his life.
And for me, that fortunate, and as you know, any planet that's stationing either to go retrograde or direct, especially in a natal chart, I think for me it gives the chart extra oomph. And especially with Jupiter involved, I just can't help but think of all the things he's got away with in his life, the element of good fortune, good luck. Now, depending on what house system you use, I look at that Jupiter rule in the 5th and the 8th house, particularly in inheritances. And his story is that he only inherited $1 million from his father. We know that's inaccurate. It was hundreds of millions. And for me, that Jupiter is very, very fortunate for Donald Trump, I think, in his chart over his life.
And in the I use the Placidus system. So in the Placidus system, it's in the house of money. It's in the 2nd house. So we should all be so lucky as to have someone give us $1 million. Yeah, I take that. The other interesting thing about this set of planets here is that you've got Jupiter and it's conjunct Chiron. So Chiron it's our wound. And so this kind of is really an interesting way of looking at his whole sense of being wounded. So it has something to do with money.
And even a sense, I think, for Donald Trump that nothing is ever enough. And his stories of calling up Forbes and this obsession with wanting to be in the top, 10 people in the world or however many it is in the ranking, that he wants to be up there with the most, regardless of how much that most people couldn't spend in a lifetime anyway. It's just that woundedness of it's never enough, even though he's been so incredibly fortunate throughout his life.
Yeah. And then Jupiter is moving toward Arcturus. So he's in his progressions, he's going to be moving towards the protection that Arcturus offers. So that's one look at how he has been able to do all these things. The other interesting thing, of course, is that in the traditional chart, and by the way, I have not tried to include all of the possible aspects because there's just too many. I wanted to pick up the ones mostly that have the stars in them. But if you look at just without the stars, the chart is a bowl, and the rim planets are the moon and Uranus. But when you add the stars, Algol is on the rim. It's the leading planet. It's not a planet, but it's the leading body. So, I mean, it really points out that his emotions are handled and processed through disruption and through hitting his enemies. Okay, so wow, there are so many transits. So in looking at the transits of the stars, of course, they've all moved a tiny bit, about a degree, and plus a few minutes in his 78 years. Of course, the biggest one is the Mars-Uranus Algol, which naturally is going to hit his natal Algol, but it also is squaring Mars pretty closely. So that's activating the whole Regulus Mars ascendant. Jupiter has just passed over Aldebaran. So it's still conjunct the natal Aldebaran, not doing too much else. And coming down to Arcturus, the moon conjunct is, of course, conjunct natal Arcturus, maybe Jupiter. Chiron is transiting. Chiron is opposite natal Arcturus, which is probably the biggest thing there. So again, that pain, possibility of pain, injury, hostile actions, maybe even, physical pain. And it's also squaring that Venus-Saturn conjunction. So there's definitely, it shows the pain, the physical pain there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So then I thought, well, let's move on to the progress chart. Progress chart got really interesting for me. The biggest thing, there's that opposition from Chiron. But now we have the progress Jupiter and Venus conjuncting progressed Arcturus, and also bringing in progressed Chiron. So that's, to me, pretty significant of a time of wounding. And then you have progressed Venus, transiting Venus and Arcturus conjunct that whole section. So to me, this is a pretty big indication of a time of something major happening. Transiting Chiron being in the 6th house of health. Lots of things going on with him health-wise. And an assassination attempt would certainly affect his health. But he does have, the protection from Arcturus and Uranus, Algol transiting, that's not going to be far from the natal position, and neither is the transiting Aldebaran. Jupiter at this point, though, is not doing him much good. It's in Gemini. Well, it could be a trine there. Yeah. It's trying the progressed Chiron, so that probably is adding some to why he actually didn't get killed. He didn't even really get badly injured. So let me see. So that was a good thing. So then the next thing that happened was Joe Biden stepping down. And I really wasn't even going to look at that at first. But then it happened, so soon, 1 week later, at the full moon, which was in Capricorn. And I remembered about Steve Judd talking about one or two prominent people losing their heads. So this seemed to be, uh, pretty metaphoric way of looking at the step down as sort of losing his head. And it happened on the day of the full moon, which I thought was significant by itself. But then I thought, well, I wonder if there's anything else relating to this full moon idea in his chart. And I discovered that in solar fire, you can add the prior full moon to a chart. It's one of the user-defined points. And this is how you get that. you open up your user-defined points files, your list of files, and you can choose any one that you want, or you can make a new one. And when you edit that, it will take you to this window. And here you need to, first of all, pick the type of point that you want to deal with. And I was looking for the prior lunar phases, and it happens to have the full moon in there and the new moon. So I wanted to see about the full moon. So you click the add button and it puts it in the file. And then of course you have to save it. And then when you get back over here, you have to select that file. So I was really kind of surprised to see it sitting right there next to his natal moon. And maybe that would be making sense, but I never thought about that before. So at any rate, there it is. His moon is in the 5th house, which is children, fun, creativity, kind of just the people close to you who like you. And it's trine Regulus, Chiron, and the North Node. And I really just thought that fits so well with his being known for his empathy and care for people that are having difficulties.
And of course, Joe Biden has had a lot of tragedy in his life, even around the time he was first elected senator with his own family in that awful
Yeah,
accident. And he has really a lifetime of that trauma. His children, one of them who went to war and passed, and I think another son who passed away as well. So tapping into his own tragedies, maybe as well, referring to that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's in the 9th house, so um it's become a philosophy for him that this is how you deal with tragedy. It's like a religious view, and it ties in with his religious views because, I mean, he is a Catholic. He has strong religious views, so he looks at it that way. Um, and then there's Arcturus in the 3rd house, which is, I'm sorry, the 11th house. 11th house, of course, I think of this as your fandom, all your fans, people who like you, the worldwide group of people who support you. And he is viewed in favorable light in the wider world. Algol sits there in the 6th house, and it's opposing his sun Venus. So Algol, oh my gosh, is like staring down his life force. Sun in the 12th house. 12th house is hospitalizations, private things. He was, in fact, hospitalized in February of 1988, he had 2 different brain aneurysms, which the brain itself could be kind of thought of as a private thing. You can't see inside of it. Certainly fits hidden enemies, as you would associate with the 12th house. And having these enemies working behind the scenes. So again, this is something that was present in his life, all adding to his capability of being empathetic to people. Okay, so these, I just kind of did this rather quickly. The transit chart for the step down against his natal chart and his progress chart. They're not going to be, the transit chart's not going to be very different from Donald Trump's shooting, but it's the inner planets that would be different. The moon is no longer close to Arcturus, and Mars has moved, let's see, where's the moon? Down here. And Mars has also moved on, so that it's no longer conjunct Uranus. So the Uranus Algol conjunction itself is still there, but it's not being triggered by Mars. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why this event wasn't nearly as dramatic as the attempted assassination. In the natal chart, you have that prior full moon, and it's shown in the chart as this vertical bar right here. And it's there at 29. Well, it's almost at 29 degrees. It's 0 degrees of Taurus. In the transit chart, it's 29 degrees, and it's conjunct Pluto, which is retrograde at that moment. So it's not, Pluto is not quite to the 29th degree yet, but it will be. And so these two are square. And to me, what that says is the loss of something that is dear to him. And also just this Uranus Algol conjunction being in the 6th house, his health, I think, is an issue for him. And that it's a motivating factor for why he stepped down. But it was the right decision.
And he must be thinking to himself, after 3 times of trying, he finally got the presidency.
Yeah.
He gets there and then he has to step down.
Yeah. But it might be going out at the right time, you know.
Absolutely.
So now, then I started thinking about, well, what about the country as a whole? What is the country going to do with this election? Is the first thing you need to look at is the Aries ingress and the quarterly ingresses. So in the Aries ingress, here's those two yachts, Pluto, Neptune, Regulus, and Arcturus, Algol, and let's see, who's this other one? Neptune, of course. So those, and it's like they overlap each other, and the Pluto and Algol are trine. So this is like carrying on this theme throughout the whole thing. The biggest thing there is Venus Saturn being conjunct and squaring Aldebaran, which says to me that the square is making integrity difficult to achieve, that it's not being, or at least a part of it is not happening. And that kind of also points to the Regulus Neptune. You know, there's all these lies and misconceptions about what's happening in our country. and aimed at the president, aimed at power, and aimed at being protective of our democracy. So this as a fixed ascendant, so it means that it's good for the whole year. I didn't look at all of the cardinal ingresses. I looked only at the Libra ingress because it's closest to the election. Oh, one more thing about this. The Venus and the Saturn Venus is obviously related to women. So the women and Saturn being together, Saturn can be the good man, the man who is honest and ethical. And so, there's just like two ways you could look at that. You could also look at that as being the women who agree with the lies and the misinformation. The women who are actually against other women. So this whole issue of integrity is important. And I think the other thing is just that it's beginning to point to the fact that women are going to play an important role in this election.
I think already the stats are showing women. I mean, there's more women voters in the United States, number one, but number two, I think even in the early voting, they're voting at a higher rate. I think nearly 9-10 points overall. And so that I think you're right, that says a lot right now. And of course, 2022, we saw the Supreme Court of the United States, the overturning with Roe, and of course, all of the political fallout after that. So that's going to be really quite interesting in the data shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really kind of pointing out the difficulty of protecting democracy, and then it depends on the integrity of the people involved. In the Libra chart, of course, there's the same two yods because they're not that far apart in time. Regulus is in the house of government there, which is the government, and it's right on the cusp of the 11th house. So it's the 11th house is the Congress, and it's specifically the Senate, but the Congress as a whole also. So, and then the other, again, women, Venus is there, quincunx Uranus. So it's like over here in the first one, it's squaring Aldebaran. Now it's quincunx, the Uranus Algol, which is, fighting against a mighty foe, really.
And for me, the strength of that Venus, domicile, direct, conjunct an angle or not too far away from an angle, and conjunct, as you say. So that's for me a very, very strong Venus. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, there is that trapezoid format in there, which I just think is really interesting. So it's like this is going to be a really heavy duty election. And with the Neptune involved, I just think there is that confusion and tension and turmoil that's going on between the existing power structure and women. So then the next thing you have to look at are the eclipses and the new moon. So I'll try not to be too lengthy here.
No, I love the depth that you go into. Really, really fascinating charts, and all the research you put together is remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, as we know from looking at lunar eclipses for anything else, when they happen before the solar eclipse, they are an emotional anticipation. It's in Pisces, which is a mutable water sign. And according to what I read in some of these in this book, the sign Pisces talks about the discontent of the common people, the moon represents the common people. And by that is meant people who are not in positions of authority. It also, Pisces is also susceptible to deep conspiracies. It's conjunct Neptune. So, I mean, that just sort of says what is happening in the world. There's all of these lies and misconceptions, misinformation, all of these things that are actually happening, and people have an emotional investment in them. And it's in the 11th house. So it's really talking about the Congress and specifically the Senate. Pisces is also, of course, related to religious conviction and higher learning. So, you know, there's this element of an ethereal connection to all of these words that are coming out. Oh, well, since it is Quincunx Arcturus, it's not getting the protection, and it's also dissension within the House, the Senate, the Congress. So it shows you that. Arcturus, Algol, Uranus, Quincunx is there, the same. If you kind of look at that, the lunar eclipse is like tying all of this together. It's at the sextile point to both of the planets that are Quincunx regular. So it's again pointing to the ouster of the difficulty of dealing with the presidency. So, okay. The solar eclipse. So this is where you start getting action. In Bernadette Brady's book, The Eagle and the Lark, this is Saros Series 8 Sao. And its interpretation in that book is that it is a separation and loss. To finish something and to feel sad at its conclusion. There's also possible physical injury through, you know, straining yourself, overdoing things yourself, not from an outside source. Which I thought that was quite interesting, considering Biden stepping down. That there's that. The solar eclipse, one of the ways you look at the strength is where it's traveling. And this particular eclipse starts way down below South America. Oops. And travels westward across the Pacific and on towards the Far East, really. So it's not real strong in relation to the US chart, which might be a good thing. It's here in the 9th house, which deals with the religious views, philosophical issues, and it's in Libra, so it's also dealing with the issue of equality and your relationships with people. It also in the 9th house deals with the courts, so it could point to the courts having to be involved after the election. We'll find out for sure. The ruler Venus is in Scorpio. It's in the 10th house and it's conjunct the midheaven. So to me, this is kind of encouraging because Scorpio is such an intense sign. So that would be an indication of the women, the intensity that the women feel towards this, and that they will have a lot to say about how it comes out.
Absolutely.
So let's see. The other thing that the books were talking about as far as the solar eclipse being in an air sign is that it can deal with famine and sickness and storms. And we've certainly seen some storms lately. I don't know about the other two things, but yeah, hurricanes, terrible hurricanes.
Absolutely. I'm here on the east coast of North Carolina. Of course, the west part of this state has been heavily hit with flooding. You've got Florida,
Wow.
awful storms. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the new moon. So as I think most people think about, the new moon is the seeds of something new, something germinating deep within the earth. You cannot see it, but it's there. It's being born. It's in Scorpio, right here in the 12th house. Scorpio again, intense, deep emotions. Scorpio itself has a very hard time sharing their emotions with anyone. And it's in the 12th house, which is also very private. So we're not going to know. We're not going to know what this new moon is actually bringing until it gets a little farther on into its phases. And of course, in the 12th house, it could also be secret enemies, which is not a good idea. The rulers, the traditional and modern rulers, Mars and Pluto. Mars is in Cancer, just kind of an uncomfortable place for Mars to be. And Pluto is in Capricorn, so they're opposite each other. So I don't know. This is the war between putting your energy into caring and nurturing versus putting your energy into power and financial capabilities, traditional conservative ideas that are not really being expressed as nurturing and caring.
It's quite a destructive, or it can be the potential for a destructive combination. As you said, Mars is not in great shape. It's in fall there in the partile opposition to Pluto. Is hopefully it doesn't manifest that way, but it's a little bit of a worry to look at that.
Oh yeah. Mars is also trying Neptune, which brings it into that yod. So one of the interpretations could be the death of the president. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I don't know. It's going to be a new president. Okay, now this gets really tricky. Okay, so I didn't think there would be all that much going on in the country chart. And so what I wanted to do is look at these things we just looked at in relation to the chart. But I also wanted to start with the natal chart, which is 248 years old now. Algol sits in the 6th house, and it forms this grand trine, Neptune, Pluto, in the natal chart. So 248 years ago, Neptune and Pluto were trining each other. And Pluto in the natal chart is retrograde, so it's not as pushy. Pluto has a tremendous amount of push when it's in direct mode, but retrograde, it's not quite so bad. And Neptune, of course, in the 9th house, where religious views, and Neptune itself can be very spiritual, connection to the other side, so to speak. Algol in the 6th house is the nation's health. And it also refers to the employees, the workers, and also the military. And related to the military is the sense of service to the country. So Algol is in an important place. There's also this quincunx to Regulus from Pluto that's part of that trine. So even though people are working together here, they're not wanting a king. And that was part of the whole negotiation of how they were going to deal with a president. They didn't want a king. Algol is also involved in a pretty major T-square, again relating to Regulus, squaring Regulus, squaring the moon, and the moon and Regulus opposite each other. So the moon being the common people versus the king or president, and Algol looking at things from the point of view of serving the country. It kind of really points out the people rebelling against the king very clearly. Let's see, then there's also...
And of course, another decision from the Supreme Court essentially is saying that future presidents can be kings. And of course, America went against, well, my people told the British, no, we don't want the monarchy. We don't want a king. We want for the people, by the people, and a healthy democracy that way. So that's really interesting in what you're saying here.
Yeah. And then also there's another T-square with Mercury at the apex and Arcturus and Chiron being opposite. Arcturus being in the 10th house, which is the government and the whole idea of the Congress and the Senate, how they came up with that idea and that was going to be the structure. And just the opposition to Chiron, all of the painful things they had to go through to get to this point. And then the squares to Mercury. Mercury is retrograde. It's in the 8th house of death. So there was obviously a lot of deaths involved in reaching this point. The whole Revolutionary War it took to get to this point. And again, Mercury is in Cancer, so it's an emotional method of thinking and reasoning things out. Arcturus is also involved in a trine to Mars, and Mars has transiting Jupiter there as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so there's the protector feeling, Mars as the protector, Arcturus as the protector, working together. And Mars is in the 7th house, which is foreign affairs and foreign partners. So we did get, at that time, we did get the support from France. And of course, the Uranus conjunction is in the 6th house as well. So this whole idea of serving, and Uranus can also be enlightenment. It doesn't have to be just chaos, but enlightenment does often involve disrupting your established mode of thinking. So what I wanted to look at first, as far as movement things, the Libra ingress, the eclipses, and the new moon. So here's the Libra ingress. And of course, it's conjunct the country's midheaven, which is 0-1 degrees of Libra. So every year, this is going to be happening. the Libra ingress would be there, because the Libra ingress would always be at 0 degrees of Libra. So, but this year, I think it's just much more important because we're having this election. And all of these ingresses and eclipses are setting the tone for the year, for the election, for the outcome of everything. So let's see, in the Aries ingress, which I didn't put on here, we had really a sense of the tone for the year being defending democracy and depending on the integrity of the Congress. And with the Libra ingress chart itself, we had the confusion and turmoil between the existing power structures and women. So we're bringing that in there. The lunar eclipse is down here on the bottom, conjunct Neptune, which is closing in on the IC, but it's kind of a ways away there. So what it kind of points out to me is that there is this tremendous emotional anticipation about the election because it has so many parts. It sits in the 3rd house, which is communication, and in the natal chart for the country, which would be the news media, social media, all of those means of communicating to the country as a whole. The conjunction to Neptune is a little bit far, but it's still there, and it's conjunct in the lunar eclipse itself, and it's opposing the Libra ingress too. So there's a lot going on with that. A lot of discussion about truth and finding truth versus lies and misinformation.
It is remarkable in this day and age where information is instant and at our fingertips, yet there's never been more misinformation in history.
Yeah. They haven't really found a way to indicate truth at the moment.
I think because there are so many silos, it's not, 40, 50 years ago where maybe you had, speaking about the US, like a Walter Cronkite, and everyone was tuning into the same news station. Now the social media, they have all their own echo chambers. So the information, truth or objective fact is not permeating through all these media systems because of the spin. So people are literally living in different realities.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that transiting Neptune is retrograde. So in my experience, when Neptune is retrograde, it can see through the haze. It can see clearly. It's not confusion. So to me, what this is saying is that it's a time of being able to see through some of all this misinformation, some of these lies, the gaslighting, all of that. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing there.
Maybe we get to the point that, the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah, that would be good. I think, well, there was that big what did they do? They had this naked Trump balloon or something.
Oh, that's right. You're right. What was that? It was a huge, was it like a paper mache statue in Nevada? I think, was it Las Vegas?
Yeah,
And
something like that.
it was a sight to behold, I think.
Yeah. Not sure I'd want to see that. Anyway, going along with being able to see through the haze, the lunar eclipse at Neptune is also trine the natal Mercury, which is also negative. But so there's some insight there on the this whole idea of emotional reasoning, which is kind of an oxymoron, I guess. And that also brings in the sextile to the natal Neptune. And here's that yod again. So that's part of the lunar eclipse landscape is accenting that as well. Oh yeah. And it's also sextile, the natal Algol and the transiting Algol Uranus conjunction as well. So there's this lunar eclipse to me is really symbolic that the country is so tired of really just Trump fatigue, I think, and beginning and able not to buy into the political fantasy. And then we get to the actual transits. I wanted to explain about first is how I got to this date that I used. So I needed to use the date and time of the Hawaii time at the end of the election. So I needed to progress the chart to that point. So one of the things that's happening is on November 3rd, Washington, D.C. reverts to standard time, which means it's going to be 5 hours ahead of Hawaii time. Hawaii does not have daylight savings time, so it's always been on standard time. So that means adjusting the 7 p.m. time on 11/5 by 5 hours puts it at 12 a.m. on the 6th, the next day. So that's the date that I used to do the progressions and for the transit chart. I like to look at the progressed chart because to me, the progressions tell you who you are now. The natal chart tells you where you started off, and those things are still very much present. But the progress chart tells you how you've changed and what things are just different for you now.
I totally agree. I love the progressions, particularly for an individual's life, whether that's progressed moon phases, the slower moving planets, obviously, because the outer planets and the social planets move so slowly. But as you're doing here, as you're bringing in a larger swath of time, those progressions move a lot more in a couple of 100 years. So I really like how you pulled this chart up.
Yeah, I think it's right. I redid it about 50 times. I think I finally got the right one.
Wonderful.
So at any rate, the Uranus is conjunct Aldebaran in this chart, and it's conjunct the progress midheaven, which it was really the first thing that kind of struck me as being really good for the nation. That it's we're reaching a point where we want integrity and we want to know what's really real. And so I just sort of felt like this was a kind of a breath of fresh air. They're not really connected to too many things, but they are semi-sextile to the Venus. So again, semi-sextiles being worry and anxiety for the women, or related to women, or women worrying. And it's also quincunx Saturn, which is down here in the 3rd. And again, that's retrograde. So it's not so pushy, but it has a hard time getting things right, I think. It's also has some interesting things here. Venus is opposing Saturn. This is it looks like a yod, but it's not really a yod. And to me, what that is saying, what a lot of the women have been saying all along, is that we're not going back. They're definitely not going back. But there is that worry, and there is the quincunx. Saturn is definitely going to try to make them stay, and not. So the whole idea of moving towards integrity and enlightenment is difficult.
And traditionally, that's a very strong Venus. We're in home there in fixed Earth. So I like that.
I like that too. And hopefully she'll make it.
Absolutely.
So the next thing is the moon in the 7th, and it's opposing Neptune. So we're at a point of moon again being women. It's in the 7th house, which is relationships, but it's more the foreign affairs type of relationships, and opposing Neptune, which is also retrograde and therefore capable of seeing reality. So there's some conflict there between being able to see reality and versus, wanting and basing things on the feelings of Pisces and totally being empathetic, which of course you need empathy, but you can overdo that too.
Yeah.
The 7th house also relates to marriage and just relationships in general in the country chart. So I'm kind of guessing that this might be the abortion issue, and maybe on a grander scale, eventually foreign affairs and maybe even more. So, and also just the fact that the moon is the common people, but it is especially women. And it does have this nice trine and sextile to the nodes. So I'm thinking that, again, this is a push by the women to lead us in the direction we need to go, that our lifetime existence goals are in caring for people, caring for each other, and bringing our children along. This one is the South Node, but it's also, South Node is conjunct the progress Pisces. What am I saying? No, take that out. Progress Pluto. So this is a powerful draw to the past and where we've been. And it's also the House of Representatives. 11th house is the house of the Senate, and 5th house is the House of Representatives. So, there's some harmony there. There's some possibility of working together there, which would be great for a change. And then the last thing out here, the sun in the 7th house also represents the monarch or the president, and it's in Pisces, so it is a caring, empathetic sign. And it still also relates from 7th house perspective to the foreign affairs. So at this point, the president is involved with foreign relationships all around the world. And I think that's every country is anymore. So whoever wins this election is going to have to be dealing with these things. Now, in the progress chart, you have this grand trine, Algol at the 9th. So it's looking at the religious views of people, whether easily understood, not confusion. Some of the horrendous stories that we've heard about eating cats and dogs and various things like that. I mean, we're seeing that.
A wild level of absurdity.
Oh, honestly, it is. It really is. Neptune in the first house does tend to focus on the self-interest of the country. So we have to take care of ourselves. But it can also be a sort of a what's in it for me attitude. The trine to the South Node and Pluto, you know, that's been our mode of operation for a long time. And it, you know, it has been good in lots of ways. The conjunction here of the South Node and Pluto is now really close. So that brings in Pluto to this grand trine. And fifth house of representatives involved there. So a little tidbit about Pluto. Pluto in the natal chart is at 27 degrees of Capricorn, and it's retrograde. Here in this chart, it's 29 degrees, and it's direct. It turned direct at 25 degrees. So it went back past the natal Pluto, and then it turned direct, and that happened in 1873. And then it went even farther back. The South Node then, they've always been kind of close together. The South Node then backed into Capricorn as well in 1906. And at that time, Pluto was 26 degrees of Capricorn. And then what happened is that the South Node then moved past Pluto, and it was separating, and it was in that condition for 197 days, which turned out to be 1973. So at 1973, they were really, really closely conjunct. And so I'm thinking about what was happening in 1973. That was when Roe v. Wade was passed. The Vietnam War ended, and the Paris Peace Accord was adopted. So that was kind of interesting that these were peaceful, positive things that moved us forward. But there was also the oil crisis, the first oil crisis, and the beginning of the Watergate scandal. So I just thought that was kind of interesting how, because they're so close together now. And I got to thinking, well, how did they start off, and how did they get this close now?
Fascinating.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. So, but there is more to this configuration. The moon. The moon is sextile Algol, sextile Pluto, and it makes this into a kite. And the moon, women are leading the kite. They're keeping it going forward. So I just thought that was, it almost gave me chills. It was good. So anyhow, progressed Pluto is here at the 29th degree. Now we know also that transiting Pluto is at the 29th degree, which we'll see at some point here. And we know that the 29th degree is an ending of things. So I thought, well, okay, how long is that going to go on? Well, it won't happen until the progressed date. Now, the date after birth that this happens is April 5th, 1777. So if the country does survive that long, it will be 275 years old. So we have a ways to go. This trine is, and this part of the configuration is going to be around for a long time. Then in addition, if you look at Neptune, it will be within 2 to 3 degrees of this trine also for a long time. And for the trine to Pluto for a long time. And it looks like it's going to be about 400 years. So that's going to be a long time, a long, long time, and none of us are going to be alive at that time. So okay, let me see. Those are the sextiles, moon sextiles, opportunities from the past, of power from the past. We can take lessons from that. The sextile to Algol. I have to look at that as an opportunity of higher learning. It could be traveling around the world, which is probably going to be continuing to happen. But I think in view of Algol in the myth being the victim, I think that we have an opportunity to understand that and understand how painful that is and how that might lead to the anger that's going to decapitate the enemy. I think we have to get that in our mind. And there's a T-square. Good old Algol again. Squaring Regulus, of course, that's something we've all been living with forever. But it brings in Mercury, the square to Mercury, and then Mercury opposing Regulus. So there is this whole idea. Mercury is not in Aquarius. So Aquarius is this energy that is capable of amassing a giant amount of information. So we're going to be, and we have been for some time now, getting all of this information, all of these facts and figures, and we see it every day in all of the news, the Facebook, the TikToks, all of those things. So that's all there, and it's all in the house of health, military service to the country. But it's not clear, it's not right. We get a lot of, I mean, it's just showing that there is so much of it that we can't quite figure it out. And it's aimed at the president and aimed at Algol to cloud the issue of religious views, cloud the issues of higher learning, going beyond facts and figures. Yeah, there's another one. This one doesn't involve any of the fixed stars, but it is kind of interesting. You have Jupiter, progressed Jupiter in the Senate, squaring Chiron and squaring Mars. So Jupiter being retrograde, narrow-mindedness, close-mindedness, squaring Chiron in the 8th, which is house of death and the death rate, and the pain associated with that, maybe physical harm, opposing Mars, which is certainly capable of creating physical harm. Mars is retrograde. So usually I think Mars retrograde is not as aggressive still, and it's in Libra, which is not a good place for it anyhow. Mars is not too good at compromise at all. And in Libra, I mean, that's Libra's thing, compromise. So being retrograde, that's going to be a difficult thing to achieve. And Mars squaring Jupiter is, this closed-mindedness is not helping. It's like, I have my views and I'm keeping my views. And we see that a lot every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other thing is that Chiron is ruled by Mars. So it's not in good shape either. Mars is in the second house, which deals with the country's finances. And Chiron in the eighth, in addition to death, is the finances from other countries. So we're connected to the finances of our partners and even of our non-partners. So this is a financial situation that we have to deal with. And then there are the quincunxes, which are the difficulties. They're not so much, I don't know, they're supposedly not action, but I think there can be action. So again, we have the attack on the president, and the quincunxes are to Pluto, so it's coming from, and the South Node too, really coming from the power brokers from the past. And it's also coming from the moon, which is, can be the women of the country and the common people. So they're both pushing against the presidency. And they're doing it together in a concerted sort of way because Pluto and the moon are sextile. There's another one, Arcturus, the sun, and Algol. So Arcturus and Algol, Algol's preventing the protection that Arcturus could be providing. And the president is also making it difficult for Arcturus to provide any sort of protection. So, or else he's just standing in the way and not allowing the protection to come in. And then the sextile between the president and Algol, the devil star, the Death Star. So, and that of course is related to the courts and the religious views. So again, there's sort of this difficult time of after the election that could be, something that has to be resolved in the courts. I told you this was going to be a long time.
It's such a great amount of information, and I love how you've explained it and pulled it all together. So thank you so much.
Well, I hope it doesn't get too long for people to want to watch. So going back to the kite, I think this is by far the most important configuration in all of them. The reason is you have the common people, women in particular, being tired of all the lies and chaos of the last several years. And then here we have the lunar eclipse right there, along with transiting Neptune right there. So to me, here we're saying the moon in the progress chart is leading the kite. It's heading it in the direction it needs to go. And then here's the lunar eclipse saying, yeah, we're taking you there. But again, it's the moon. So it's the common people, it's the women. And it's also, maybe not going to happen, but I think it is. And it's emotional because it's not, the lunar eclipse is not talking about action, it's talking about feelings. So that's the feeling, is that we're going to go there. And then, of course, along with that, we have that yod that is also involved. So and we're still in the grips of the Pluto return, which it hit the natal chart a while back, but right now it's right on top of the progressed Pluto. So yeah, that's kind of where that is.
I think you mentioned this before, a sense of endings possibly. And of course, we're at the critical degree now with Pluto. If we're just talking about transiting, and then for the next 20 years, we're going to be going through fixed air. We're going to be going for Aquarius.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be very different. I don't know how it's going to be better, but it will be. It's got to
Yeah,
be.
absolutely.
And one thing I have learned from watching Pluto, I was watching it when it first went into Capricorn, and at that time, I had on my website this little explanation of what things would be doing, and I said that I didn't know how it was going to be, but we were in for an overhaul, and we certainly have been.
Absolutely.
I'm not totally sure about what it's going to do in Aquarius, but it's got to be better. But what I was going to just say though is that um, what I really have found is that in the early degrees, you don't really notice the change all that much. But as it gets into the later degrees, really late degrees, it's full bore on, whatever that sign is talking about. So I think it's going to be a while before we really start feeling the effects of Pluto and Aquarius.
Absolutely. I remember speaking to Michael Luton, and he was saying what you're saying. Essentially, he said when Pluto first is ingress into a sign, it's like a bird that comes on your lawn. You don't really know what's happening. There's not much going on. But as you said, towards the end, it's like an avalanche or a hurricane or something's going on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's one other thing I wanted to just point out here, and that is, maybe I said this already, the transiting Chiron, it's retrograde at the moment. But it has been conjunct the progressed and I think the natal Chiron. This is Chiron takes about 50 years to complete a cycle, and which tells me that we're in a Chiron return as well as a Pluto return. So yeah, researching not only our pain, but Chiron was also the god of medicine, the god of military training. He taught all of the gods all of the things they needed to know. So this is a time also of a lot of technological advancements in all of those areas. So we have that going on too. So, okay, we're getting to the end of this part. I wanted to look at the Sun-Jupiter relationships. So as I mentioned, the Sun in the chart being the outgoing, or maybe even Donald Trump as in past presidents, and the transiting Sun being the new president. What we have here with transiting Jupiter is the square to the Sun, the progressed Sun. So it's like Jupiter, when it's retrograde, can be the closed-minded, overconfident energy that is squaring the progressed Sun. So this, in a way, this is a good thing because it's saying that it's time to end that. transiting Jupiter is also trine progressed Saturn. So this is maybe less good because it's keeping the old standard in place. But then we have the transiting Sun, which would be the new president, coming in and trining the progressed Jupiter, which is still retrograde, but there's hope. It's kind of what I see there. And that the incoming president is bringing that intensity, and Scorpio is a very deep sign, deep understanding sign, and it can't share its pain, but it feels it so deeply. So there is that understanding of how to connect with Jupiter. So we'll see how that goes. And then the Uranus Algol transit itself, we have it's trine to Neptune, and it's approaching, and it's only by like 11 minutes. So it's and it's happening. This is happening when it does reach that exact degree. It's happening during the inauguration. So that should be very interesting to see that whether the integrity holds up, or whether I don't think there's going to be disruption, because Uranus, in my experience, has been, when it's retrograde, it's more of an enlightenment issue than a chaos issue.
Interesting.
And a trine would be an easy flow, so hopefully that will be the case. And it's also trine and sextile the nodes, so that is sextile the north node, which would be that there's opportunity, but it takes work to get to our goals. And the trine to the south node is that we're able to draw on our past and understand and use it productively. And then there is the square to Regulus, which activates that yod that we've looked at several times. So again, this is kind of a reiteration of out with the old king, I think. And that's, I think, one more set. The transiting nodes, as we know, the transiting nodes are also important for big events. And what we have with the transiting nodes, there is sextile and trine to Aldebaran and Uranus in the progressed chart. So to me, this is bringing integrity and ethics right to the front. I think that it has to be a good thing. And but there is worry about the women. The women want to go to the future. The quincunx to the south node to the past, and not wanting to go back there because of what life has been for women. And then there is this, which we've already looked at, the new moon, transiting moon, making a yod. So it's going to be very interesting to see. There's definitely going to be something new coming out of all of this. And I'm hopeful. I really am hopeful.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So that is all I have.
Absolutely fantastic presentation, and so wonderfully in depth and well explained. Fantastic delineations. I love actually the graphics you've got up as well, just how well ordered it is and easy to follow. So thank you so much today, Gloria, for putting this wonderful presentation together.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me do it.
Fantastic. Some last questions. What's going on for you now in terms of any classes that you might be teaching? I think we said before the recording, there's a possibility of a class in January for Kepler College.
As far as I know, yeah, I think it's probably would be in February because
Oh, February.
it's a 5 week course,
Mhm.
and that's the asteroid one. And usually I think those don't start at the beginning of the semester or whatever. So yeah.
Wonderful. We'll put the links to the Kepler College website, and that'll come around eventually when the links are up, and that's wonderful. Well,
Uh,
again, our appreciation. Thank you so much for a brilliant and in-depth presentation, and can't wait to have you back on again.
Good. I'll try to think of something that's interesting.
Wonderful.
All right.
This very much is.
All right. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.